welcome to the presentation on the dangers of the CONCON that I put together with the help of my beautiful wife and some of the other members of the John Birch Society here in New England. The thing that I'm going to be talking about today is that there has been a dramatic morphology or morphing of America's conscience, its psychology, its view of what America is. And so you're going to see that how the Convention of States will not help anything. In fact, it'll be a danger because in the presence of a shift that has happened to American thinking. So this is, for the beginning of this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about America's philosophical shift step by step. And first thing I'm going to talk about is a man by the name of Frederick Bastiat. And he wrote a book called The Law. And in that book, he talks about the structural changes that expand the state beyond its core function, protecting life, liberty, property, and that this will shift the people's philosophy. So all you have to do is expand the size of the government, change the nature of the government, and in so doing, it will change the way people think automatically. It reflects the same logic when you change external structures, institutions, laws, incentives. You reshape the collective mental environment and therefore the people's moral and philosophical orientation. This is the same truth is true of animals. And you take a wild animal out of its environment, you put it in a circus, it'll become an entirely different creature. So you have to have a psychological shift and a structural shift. And I'm going to show you how both have happened in America. In the first period when our government was created, we had what we call founding psychology, government as a necessary evil. And when we think about the psychological orientation at the time, if you think about the Civil War, anything became okay for the preservation of the unity. I have another slide that talks about that a little bit more in another presentation. But it's important to understand that between Clay's American system, Henry Clay, and Lincoln's Whig Party, we see if I can fix this here. The efficiency replaces morality as the highest political virtue. Oh, sorry, gosh, darn it. I'm having trouble with this, so I apologize. I'm sorry. This is something, okay. Liberty becomes a product of strong government. Liberty first, unity first, union first. So, we look at the government now as first having the responsibility of keeping us together. It's not no longer a negative force, it's a positive force. And after that, because of that, and there became a time where people, during the Progressive Reformation, started seeing government as an instrument of efficiency. So once government was united, we could basically bind people into this mentality that the government's here to do things for you or to you. Then what we can do is now we can start using, looking at government as an engine, and that's the machinery in the background. The psychological orientation becomes that man is a social unit. Freedom is coordinated, and that we have to, it's not innate. Freedom is not innate like it was in the beginning. Efficiency replaces morality as the highest political virtue. So the Constitution is reinterpreted as a living organism. Administration replaces representation, and politics becomes scientific, not moral. The will of the peoples is filtered through expert management. So that's another shift. That's a whole different paradigm that we've gone through. And the fourth shift is in the welfare state. This happens between 1930 and 1970, and where government is seen as a provider. The Great Depression instigates this. The New Deal and the Great Society redefined rights as claims upon government, not protections from it. Citizens are psychologically trained to see the state as a guarantee of well-being. Dependency becomes moralized. Fairness replaces freedom. Psychological orientation at this time is now that man's dignity depends on state. Compassion, failure is systematic, not personal. So what that has led us is to where we are right now, and from 1970 to the present, is the technocratic age, and government is seen as a problem solver. It's hard to talk to anybody in any party, right or left, as to whether or not they see government as a problem solver. That's where we are. Trump, Nixon, left, right, it doesn't matter. fix your life for you, to make things better for you, to make things more efficient. And so the technocratic age is the natural end of the progressive movement. So, but the progressive movement, progressive period, left its marker on all the other ages that we're in now. So then we're going to go back and focus on that in a little bit. The summary here, though, is that, and you can look at this, a lot of people say, well, this is America, this is what we are. But if you're going to have a solution like the convention state, then you must have an accurate assessment of who we are and where we've come from. And so government is seen first as necessary evil, and it's like guardian of unity, instrument of efficiency, provider, and then problem solver. So the question is no longer should government act, but how should government act? This is the hallmark of the administrative mind, the moral surrender of self-government to managerial control. So let's talk about the origins of the managerial control, the rise of collectivism, which our founders warned us about. Since the progressive period left a permanent genetic marker, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Men like Woodrow Wilson, who was sometimes just seen purely as a Democrat, was really a progressive Democrat. In his study of administration, he talked about the wide union we tolerate divisions of prerogative. He actually creates what the government is going to look like in this document. And he was the man that also created the Federal Reserve Act. So this is really important to understand. When you have a technocratic government, progressive government that believes in control, freedom is something that's doled out, it would make sense that you would create a banking system that would make everybody completely dependent on you. And so in his paper, The Study of Administration, he laid the intellectual groundwork for the separating politics from administration. Really important if you want to understand what's going on, you should go look at that document. He says in Restructuring of City Government that cities should be run by expert managers. He doesn't care about elected officials anymore. He feels that that's inefficient. It's around this time, and after his period, that people began looking at their politicians, how they vote, is for people to be their leaders, their providers. We look at our elected officials as the right man for the job, and once he's elected, we get behind him like he's the president of a company of some kind. The business model of America and how we think about why we vote starts with this guy. And it's pushed in through all school systems, through the Carnegie Foundation, Rockefeller, and all those usual characters. But the most important man in this drama is a man by the name of Frank Goodenow. He is Charles Marion Professor at Columbia University, the same university that Barack Obama went to. And he believes that politics includes constitution making, legislation, selection of government officers, and the control and function of the execution of the will of the state. So politics is the execution of the will of the state. He no longer believes in people making choices, having freedoms. He believes that the government should be structured in such a way that it makes things happen and it controls those mechanisms. And he believed that one of those ways to do that would be through a constitutional convention. He believes that the constitutional convention process within within our Constitution was put there to bring about this kind of circular change, this overall switching of the guard, which you'll see later on. Term limits also falls into that, which is why term limits is so dangerous, because they're working with these people to kind of put the nail in the coffin of this administrative state. And so, basically, consequential. Not if they're constitutional. So that's really important to understand. We no longer look at things if they're constitutional. We look, well, did you follow the rules properly? And so, what we have ended up with, and again, I want you to think in mind, the people with the Convention of States, Term Limits USA, they believe that, so with Charles Merriam with Lewis Brownlow, they work on drafting FDR's New Deal. Merriam is part of the Brownlow Committee, the Reorganization Act, that's how it logically follows, and he designed the executive office of the president. This is what makes the president a king, in my estimation. So when we talk about these rallies that are going on, talking about the No More Kings rallies that are happening all across America right now, this is a significant understanding of government without these people knowing it. The president the EOP designed this office was designed exactly like a kingship, like it's very similar to Charles II in Europe. And so he also came up with the Housing Act. The Housing Act is also important to understand because that gave permission for federal agencies to work and collaborate with local governments. The APA made agency rulemaking a legitimate form of lawmaking parallel to Congress. So that's a significant thing. It's parallel to Congress. It replaced legislative accountability with procedural compliance. So that's what we talk about right now. You have permission to do that, and they say, oh, well, we do because the APA says we can do it. Courts now defer to agencies if they follow proper procedure, not if they're they believe that we have, we have this very simple government. They have a simple view of it, but they don't acknowledge the fact that there's over 400,000 employees that work within the executive branch of the Fed, and within the EOP and the executive branch of our government. And those are people that are never get elected. So it's important to understand these people aren't elected. They're outside the purview of the tax collector or the taxpayer, that kind of thing. And so the New Deal, that era, normalized the idea that the federal government could intervene to regulate industries, redistribute wealth, and provide direct aid to citizens. And through that process, through the APA, every state has an Administrative Procedures Act. The federal agencies have now, all the states all have federal counterparts. So in New Hampshire, you have Department of Homeland Security, which is, for the state version of that, is the New Hampshire Department of Safety. This is the structure they set up. This is what you live in. This unaccountable, massive bureaucracy. You never vote for any of these people. This is just a handful of agencies. This is, actually 6, so unless your hand has 6 fingers. But anyway, so it's important to understand that if you're going to talk about a convention of states, it's got to take into account really the size and structure of our government. And what they did, what nobody would like to acknowledge because they want to come up with a quick solution that will not work and be harmful, is that they created this vertically integrated control system. So the federal law or global policies are embedded in federal laws and government grants. You can see that. All you have to do is go to any government website. You will see that the policies, the UN global policies, are still embedded no matter what the president does. They are there, they're there to stay, and they don't go away. And that state agencies will always receive and redistribute funding with compliance requirements. That's an important thing to remember, is that the compliance requirements come straight from the executive office of the president, and regional planning agencies implement those policies locally. That's the structure that we live in. And local governments and boards appear to decide to follow pre-set formulas. So my question to the Convention of States people is, if you're going to try to fix Congress, none of this will fix. Fixing Congress, putting term limits, anything you want, is not going to fix this structure. Not going to change anything about it. And these people, the progressive, architects, they understood that this was a dependency cycle that they would put in place. You couldn't get out of it unless you drastically rejected the system. And so, the Federal Reserve prints money. This enables massive spending. Federal agencies distribute funds. State and individuals accept the aid. Regulations and mandates come attached. Loss of autonomy, which has happened since this started. States are losing autonomy. We know that the states are more and more being defederalized and more reliance on federal funding. So we look all throughout America. Most of the states don't even have enough money to turn on the lights in their capital because they are now broke and they are completely dependent on the federal government to even exist, to function at the most basic level. When you have a situation like that, you have a dependent people that will always refer back to what the federal government is going to do for them. And now we have people that think that this is the way it's always been in America. We now have people that believe that this cycle has always existed. They take our taxes and they give it back to us. They believe this is how our government was founded. And as I said before, structural changes lead to psychological and philosophical changes. The system reinforces federal influence on state level, creating beginnings of the marble cake system. So you have funding streams, regulatory compliance, and shared goals. This is a massive oligarchy, a massive bureaucracy set up just like any corporation. So So in this process, what we've lost is checks and balances. And with the advent of the New Deal, the creation of the Executive Office of the Presidency, and the Administrative Procedures Act, America was changed. And so because of these laws, we lost what is known as dual federalism. We had nice layers of protection between the branches of the government in the states and the counties and the cities. We no longer have that. The federal government is, as you can see, is shot through at every level. Now, what's more important for people to understand is that the amount of people that you actually elect is only this small portion of this pie chart. That includes Congress, all state officials, all state legislators, everybody that is accountable to you. And this is not to mention the fact that you have towns that you elect somebody and you outsource their responsibility to town managers, which is part of the progressive model. The town managers are a byproduct of Charles Merriam, Frank Goodenow. They put that stuff in place because they believed in efficiency. Municipal associations, progressive planning agencies, all started with Charles Merriam and these reformers. So this is why a convention of states or term limits won't fix anything. The problem is structural. The real power no longer rests in Congress or election. It rests in administrative agencies. The Executive Office of the President, the EOP, established by the Brown-Noble Committee, coordinates hundreds of agencies beyond congressional reach. Limiting terms or rewriting constitutional text doesn't touch the unelected bureaucratic infrastructure that governs daily life. We are changing the actors, not the script. The administrative state is self-perpetuating, and here's how. The Administrative Procedure Act gave permanent legal status to the bureaucracy. It can't be voted out. Each new law or reform simply adds new procedural layers rather than dismantling old ones. You can unfund an agency, you can take away its money, you can say take away streams. That's what Donald Trump has done recently in this past presidency. But it doesn't take away the agency. That can only be done by an act of Congress. The structure of the agencies, the laws that exist governing that agency remain in place no matter what. It doesn't matter, you can change Congress a zillion times in a year. It will not matter a hide nor hair of difference because the structure of the administrative state stays in place. So each new law, like I said, efficiency becomes a new moral principle. So we can't reform a machine whose purpose is to reform itself. This is what they set in place. You vote, it means nothing to them. They'll do whatever they want, and we'll go into that a little bit later. So constitutional reform has been co-opted by progressive logic. Charles Merriam's systematic politics taught that government should evolve continually, a living, self-updating system. And the Convention of States fits the model perfectly. It assumes the Constitution must adapt structurally, not return philosophically. Instead of limiting power, it re-legitimizes the administrative state by rewriting its rules under the guise of renewal. This is what, when you read men like Dave Super and all the people that are standing against the Convention of States, you understand that these guys are very aware. It's surprising to me that some of the Republicans are not aware that they are literally, this is a massive power grab, and it's very dangerous for the whole country. Now, I know Democrats will use words like democracy, they'll use words like that for us don't seem relevant, but how they use democracy is very much the way de Tocqueville used it. He basically said, we would lose fairness. So one of the things we have to start recognizing on our side of the aisle, or whatever you want to call that, is that the people that we're sometimes think we're against actually are understanding things a lot better than we do. And so when somebody comes up to you and says, well, the John Birch Society is fighting the Convention of States, and so are the Democrats, so they must be Democrats. Well, that's just false logic, okay? Freedom is freedom, and we want a government that's accountable to the people. We don't want an administrative state. Term limits empower bureaucracies, not citizens. 3 reasons. Frequent turnover in Congress creates institutional amnesia. Okay, bureaucrats and NGOs become the only consistent power base. See, you could change Congress all day long. You could have a convention of states all day long. You're not going to change the NGOs. You're not going to change the town manager system. You're not going to get rid of the planning agencies. That's what people believe. If you talk to your state your selectmen or your aldermen, you ask them where they get their authority from, they'll tell you statute law. So and the problem with all this is that you have like a entrenched administrators. So they're always there. Like people say, well, I want to run for office. I want to make a difference. Well, you should really go get a job at the Capitol, because those are the people that are actually running everything. Yeah. Those are the people that are doing those are the ones that, why you can't get through to your congressman, because guess what? The guy that's answering the phone, he doesn't want you to. Had it happen to myself for 2 years. 2 years I couldn't get a hold of my state rep, okay? So every fresh face is surrounded by the same permanent staff. That's the most important thing that you have to remember. The people that are running the White House or your local government are people that are entrenched. They're not going anywhere. They're going to stay there forever. So you have to get them out. It's going to take a lot more. It's going to take a lot more than saying Congress is evil. Well, anyway, we're going to go into that in a little bit. Real reform requires moral reorientation. America needs a moral reorientation. 3 reasons. The founders built a moral constitution. Restraint, virtue, self-government, not an efficient one. None of what's happening to our government will change if people do not change, if their view of government does not change. The progressive legacy replaced moral restraint with procedural control, and until citizens reject the psychology of dependency and reclaim personal sovereignty, no structural amendment will restore liberty. Period. The end. Liberty is not a design problem, it is a discipline problem. You can't make people moral with more laws. The Constitution was not designed to control the behavior of bad people. Bad people were supposed to be self-regulating, and it's our job to get them out. What the Convention of States wants and Term Limits USA wants is an electorate that is not participating in everyday government life. So, in summary, we do not need to rewrite the Constitution. We remember what it was written for. Most important thing to remember. Now, how am I doing on time, Mr. Chris? Okay, I'm doing pretty good. All right, so they tell us that the Convention of States claim that the Constitution is broken. It needs to be fixed. You hear that all the time. There's groups coming up all the time. They sit there and they say, hey, guess what? We're going to fix the Constitution. Here's what they should have done in the first place. Well, again, you can't fix immoral people that do not abide by a contract. They do not want to follow the rules that are set in front of them. A million new documents is not going to change that. So they tell us that there's too much federal overreach, excessive scope of the national government. They argue Congress has grown beyond its constitutional bounds. It didn't grow beyond its constitutional bounds. We allowed them to do that because we asked for things, and as you saw in the slide prior to this, that people in these different periods, in Mrs. Lynch didn't see that, but you will see that in those different periods, we begin to be taught to think differently. And so they speak of the Leviathan of today's federal government that must be constrained. Well, the government is already constrained. The Constitution is not a moral document, it's a contract, and it tells them what they can and cannot do. It's very simple. They want limit the power and scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. Well, that's already established in the Constitution. So I don't understand why they want something different. It doesn't make any sense. But they say we have a fiscal crisis, debt and unchecked spending. So they want, again, put more rules into a document that already says that if they were held within their confines, what they're allowed to do, 80% of the government would vanish tomorrow. So they say they call it fiscal restraint. They say we got to get rid of the career politicians. Well, if you kick out Nancy Pelosi, the people in her district are going to re-elect Nancy Pelosi. You know why? Because the people in her district are not being educated. They don't see the flaw in what's happening in politics, and that's why it's very important when you join the John Birch Society and start reaching outside the choir, because if you don't, everybody around you is going to keep believing that government is there to do things for them, and that's why they vote for people like Nancy Pelosi, because they come in and they do things for people, and you can't compete with that. You can't compete with somebody that's going to promise you from cradle to grave caretaking. Excuse me. So they frame their mission as restoring decision-making to the people in the states. Who decides, not what is decided. Well, we saw earlier that with the Administrative Procedures Act, Congress and our elected officials have no jurisdiction over these things that are happening to us. They're just following preset, prescribed rules. They position the Convention of States as a constitutional check when Congress fails. Well, that's ridiculous. The way you check the Constitution is by teaching people about what it says and what we're supposed to do, and showing them that when you hand out the scorecards, for instance, that we have in the John Birch Society, I'll say that again, I'll probably say that word a million times, I'm a very proud member, is that you will teach people that what Congress is doing and how it's affecting them financially. It's up to us to show the citizenry what's going on and what's wrong. So, they say we need structural reform via Article 5. Well, this is interesting, so this is great. And this, they say this all the time. Mark Levin talks about structural reform. Well, we already seen in the prior slides how structural reform is what they have been doing. They've been changing the nature of our government. The progressives have for a very long time. Now, whether or not men like him and others don't know this, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're aware of their history. They don't talk like they are. But the fact is that the structural reform is what's destroyed our country. We don't need structural reform. We need to adhere to what we have. So they limit the scope of proposed amendments. They support term limits, fiscal restraints, limiting federal government to reassure skeptic. So they're always coming up with these topics that reassure people. It feels good. Oh yeah, they're going to fix this. They're going to fix that. But they don't show you the mechanism by which they're going to do it. They don't show you well, show me the step-by-step. What actually has to happen? Well, I just showed you what actually has to happen. They're not going to show you this. They're not going to talk to you about the fact that your state legislators are the primary protectors of liberty. And this happened, you can read this in Federalist 47. So, but again, they are only addressing the symptoms. So while they address, the goals address symptoms, abuse of power, monopoly of incumbency, fiscal excess, they do not tackle the administrative logic that undergirds modern government, which is ruled by experts, because that's how we vote. We want an expert to do things for us. He's the right man for the job. We're guilty of this. We do this all the time. We look for the guy with the perfect smile. We look for the handsome man. We look for the guy to come to our Republican meeting to tell us what to do next, because apparently as Americans we don't have a thing. So we have regulatory law. We live under that. Procedural dominance, delegated authority. So all of that has to be changed, and it's not addressed by the Convention of States. In other words, they want to reshape the envelope, term, scope, power, and boundaries, but not fully question the contents of the envelope. Nothing's going to happen until you change that. So, what is really broken? So let's talk about that for a little bit. What is really broken? Administrative control, not congressional overreach. Congress is not overreaching into anything. You'll see why. Real power rests with the unelected agencies, not Congress. The Administrative Procedures Act and the Executive Office of the President created a permanent government beyond voter reach. And I showed you in the earlier slide, 400,000 people just in the Executive Office of the President and excuse me, I need a drink here. It's like really dry here. So we have a permanent government beyond voter reach. We know that for a fact. To deny that is true, every state has an Administrative Procedures Act. In New Hampshire, it's 541A. And that relationship I showed you between the federal and state agencies, that's governed by that document. So, so our problems are procedural, not fiscal tyranny. Spending is a symptom. Delegated rulemaking is the disease. Every reform adds new regulatory mechanisms. The system feeds itself through efficiency. So, you've never heard of a government agency getting smaller, have you? Okay, it doesn't happen. You might take their money away. You might get some people fired, but the size, the scope, and their responsibility remains exactly the same. It never goes anywhere. So right now we have a bunch of husks of agencies, through Musk and Trump, sitting out there waiting to be refilled the next time a Democrat or a progressive becomes elected. So term limits strengthen bureaucracy, and short-term legislators rely on long-term administrators. Again, you go to get elected, you have term limits. Guess who's going to tell you how to do things? You're going to go into office, and they're going to say, "Well, the NCL tells us what to do here." Oh, okay, thank you. Or you go to the MMA, the Municipal Association. The main MMA. I don't know what they have in Massachusetts, but every state has a municipal association. So what do our elected officials do? They go for the people that are already there, the administrators, the check writers, and they say, "Oh, we don't know what they're doing." Well, here's what you got to do. That's why when you go to write a bill, you write a law, you have a guy that checks it, and he says it reinforces the progressive premise. And my argument here is that the Convention of States is a brainchild of the progressive movement. So if I have made that clear at this point, you should understand that. It treats the Constitution as an evolving tool, not a fixed covenant, which is what it's supposed to be looked at. It codifies progressive faith in perpetual redesign and the same logic that birthed the administrative state. So I would recommend you read Dave Super's article. It's on our website, or it's on the JBS website. A structural problem is that the machinery of government, its framework, organizational, and internal logic has changed, and I showed you that in the beginning. Every successive problem creates a change in the government, how we think about its purpose. Particularly, with the Civil War, we'll look at what happened with 9/11. We were willing to throw away our rights immediately. We never even looked at the Patriot Act, which was written by Joe Biden. But people think it was such an awesome patriotic good. They were running around with flags, and this is how progressives work. They use the Democrats and Republicans against each other all the time to an end of more control. So that's the Hegelian dialogue. Okay, so here we go. So here's the rule. Congress no longer primarily makes laws. Administrative agencies do. We're going to go into that in a second. The president no longer executes law. He manages a bureaucratic network that produces regulation. The follow-up presentation to this will show you exactly how the EOP is no different than a kingship. So this is interesting. We hear now, we're making fun of these people that are going, no more kings. It's a beautiful opportunity for us on the right to say, you know what, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't have kings. They should be accountable to us. All of our elected officials, and go in and teach them about that and have conversations with them, because that's what I'm doing. Go down, and this is an opportunity to teach people that, you know what, we may not agree on everything, but we're going to agree on the limitations of government and how it's not fair for everybody. We want a limited government. This is, you don't like it when Donald Trump does things? I say to them, they go, no, I don't like that. He's bad. Well, guess what? Neither do I. Well, guess what? I don't like when Biden does it either. And so we can't have it both ways. You want to stop this, you have to agree that there is a role and a purpose of government. And that's the discussion that we should be having. What is the purpose of government? Okay. Courts often defer to agencies instead of protecting citizens from them via doctrines like the Chevron defense. Federal funding streams, grant systems, and regional agencies tie local and state governments into the same administrative web. That's the problem, and we have people in this audience that know about this, that we know how federal programs tie states and bind their hands. So, will the Convention of States fix that? Of course not. Convention of States is not going to stop the money coming from agencies, federal agencies, to national. It's never going to stop it. Not at all. You can change Congress all day long. They're not going to change that. So, in fact, if you have more frequent rotation of congressmen, you're less likely to get rid of, federal overreach into our states. So, you have to, this again, even if you replace every elected official, the structure of the administrative state remains. That structure, the Brown Law Committee, the APA, in 1946, and the executive office locked into permanence. That's the thing, not going anywhere. Nobody wants to talk about the EOP and what it means. And this is what turns the representative republic into an administrative regime. This has been going on for a long time. So our founding fathers, how it was supposed to work under the Constitution, where they said that Congress would make laws. Article 2, the executive enforces them. That's all they do, they enforce it. And courts interpret them. This was what founders designed, a clear separation of powers. But how it is now in practice, Congress often passes broad, vague laws and then tells agencies to fill in the details. Very important, people don't know that. They fill in details. This is called delegation of legislative authority. Happens all the time. Congress writes the mission statement and agencies write the rule book. Okay? So while Congress passes the law, the real content, the binding rules that affect citizens comes from agency regulations. One example of that is the Clean Air Act. Another one is the Affordable Care Act. Another example of that is the Dodd-Frank Act. So, on and on. You can get thousands of these. Just look them up on the internet. The Endangered Species Act is another one. I mean, when we look at what happened with the EPA, for instance, when that was created, people don't realize that was like, oh, this is great. They're going to protect the environment and stop people from dumping toxic waste in the ground. Well, that was a big lie, because basically all it did was put administrative control on all things environmental at every state level. And the EPA is one of the most powerful agencies in America. So how does that play out in New Hampshire? So let's look at this really quick. And I think I'm doing pretty good on time, so I'm going a little fast, my first time out, so I apologize. So, the New Hampshire Constitution, Part 2, Article 18 says that all money and bills originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as other bills. This clause gives exclusive budgetary authority to the House of Representatives. The same is true in Massachusetts, by the way. So, not the governor, not agencies, and not local entities. Local entities do not have the authority to spend money unless they get permission from the House. In other words, only the people's elected representatives in the House can initiate authorizing the expenditures or acceptance of public money. I don't see any pro-convention of states people here for a reason, because they don't want to talk about this stuff. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that this abuse of power is beyond their reach. So in practice, federal money, grant money, enters the state and is administered through the executive branch, regional planning commissions, or municipal agencies via state programs like DOT, DHHS, etc. Without originating as an appropriation in the House, then these funds bypass the constitutional chain of authority. That's what we have going on. We have people in towns having their outsourcing their responsibility to municipal associations, to planning agencies. That's what's happening. And they are also bypassing the constitutional chain of command. And so you can't fix anything with the Convention of States or Term Limits USA with this mechanism in place. So we have this, most federal programs, especially those under HUD, DOT, use pass-through funding. The federal agency awards money to the state government. The state agency, Office of Planning, whatever, DOT, passes it to a regional municipal entities, and local governments sign cooperative agreements, or MOUs, or, and I forgot my notes on that one, but anyway, to receive the money. However, unless the federal money is explicitly accepted by a bill originating in the New Hampshire House and the terms and conditions of the grant are approved by the legislature, it is arguably unconstitutional in the New Hampshire Constitution. And pass-through funding is particularly true of, like, say, the NBRC. It happens all the time. HUD, MBTA, which New Hampshire will become part of that eventually. People from Massachusetts in the audience will know about that. Federal transportation energy grants routed to RPCs, regional planning commissions, and in those cases, unelected regional boards are effectively making appropriations of power reserved solely to the people's representatives in the House. So here's where the entire structure of our government has already changed. It happened a long time ago, and we need to address this issue. What are we going to do about it? So there are real solutions to federal overreach. The 10th Amendment, powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited by the states or reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That means any federal program that operates outside the delegated powers in Article 1, Section 8 is not binding on the states. So when a state legislator cries like a baby and tells me Congress is evil and they're controlling everything, we have to fix Congress, well, stop taking their money. Stand up to them, stop taking their money. But guess what? You want the handout. Because you want to look like the hero. We just had it happen with a Republican over in Maine. Congressionally directed spending is what they call it. And they take the money and they look like heroes. It's socialism, front to back, just like the Democrats are doing. It doesn't look like housing. It doesn't look like welfare. It's not for LGBTQ. But guess what? It's for beautiful sidewalks and beautiful lampposts in rich neighborhoods for their rich friends and the people that are getting them elected and giving them money. So guess what? We're all guilty, both parties. It doesn't matter. They're taking the money. Everybody's taking money. This means that any federal program that operates outside the delegated powers of Article 1 sections, and again, it's not binding, and the federal government cannot compel participation. And this goes back again to the 10th Amendment, the anti-commandeering doctrine. The Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld that the federal government cannot compel states to enact or administer federal programs. But what we don't have are state legislators willing to stop it. That's the problem. And this is what the Convention of States and Term Limits USA is constantly drawing your attention from. I think it's Federalist 47. Okay, sorry. I had more notes on this, but anyway, I'll tell you the sad story later on. But so again, we have New York, 1992, states cannot be forced to take title to radioactive waste under federal law. Prince versus the United States, states cannot be required to implement federal gun background checks. It just goes on and on. You can find millions of them across the internet. Why are state legislators being taught this well, because they don't want them to do that. They want their progressive fix, and that's what they're going to push for. You can refuse to appropriate matching funds. I was hoping we'd have some state legislators here today, so that's why I put this in, but I'll keep it in because we will in the future. Pass state sovereignty or non-participation legislation. I've been trying to work on this for 3 years. I can't get one state legislator to participate in any of these programs. They don't even know what they're looking at. You know, states can enact laws that formally declare non-participation in certain federal programs. Healthcare Freedom Acts, Second Amendment sanctuary laws, Educational Sovereignty Acts, non-participation in taking funds from any agency that has anything to do with the UN. Towns can do this. Towns can pass ordinances and say, we're not participating, we're not going to do it. They won't do it. They're terrified they're going to take their money away. So they get afraid, and this is what dependency looks like. You are a slave, we have your money, we're going to make you eat by candlelight and eat whatever, peanut butter and jelly, till the cows come home, and we're not going to let you have your sovereignty back. But you have it, but they just made you afraid to have it. And so, does America want to change? Sort of. Are they doing anything about it? Not really. They're not doing anything really about it. They're just complaining about it, but they're not making any changes. And they're certainly not going to elect people that are going to stand up for their sovereignty. They can say they want sovereignty, but they don't want sovereignty. They just want to have things not change the way they are right now, but understand that it's going to get much, much worse. And so you have to know that if you don't stand up now, your children will never be free. If you have children. I don't have any children. Well, I have some. I don't know where they are, but no, but they are my children. And I just want to say that if you have children, your country is being permanently changed forever. So you either do it now or you let your children fight a revolutionary war. That's what it's going to take. So either you say no now and suffer a little bit, let them have your streets have a lot of bumps in them. I mean, Massachusetts and New Hampshire don't even have good streets to begin with, so who cares, right? Take away everything from us, because we're not going to comply with this stuff. And if you're in public office and you're taking grant money, you are just as guilty as anybody else. You are as guilty as the communists that are going to come across our borders and take over our country. So don't complain about what other people are doing. Very important to understand this. So I need to get on my high horse there a little bit, but you know, nothing changes if nobody changes. And as I showed before in the beginning, remember I showed you how the psychological shift happens over time. You change the laws, you change the rules, and everybody starts thinking differently. And we go from a nation of people who were independent, who think of government as a necessary evil, to a people that can't even imagine what their lives would be like if they didn't have money, if they couldn't turn on the lights at the Capitol. So what? Let it, turn the whole thing off. You don't need it, right? So state legislators can control state budget by control and appropriation. They can fund state agencies that act as conduits for federal grants, and they can prohibit acceptance of federal grant categories, AG, HUD, EPA, and DOT. I haven't seen one bill like that pass in 5 years in New England. Not one state legislator has stood up to any illegal federal program. Okay, so, but now they want to have a convention of states because that's going to fix everything. They're compliant. They're doing what the progressives want them to do, and so we need to be aware of that. We can create oversight committees for federal grants. I suggested that as well. Let's start out with an accountability program. I think I've shown some of you here in the audience about what that would look like. Nobody wants to do that either. Let's at least start checking the accountability on the money. Where's the money going? Who's handling it? You're giving out grant money, show proof that where you spent it, what you did, and you didn't just give it to your nephew for his college fund. Because that's what's happening. This is the biggest source, grants are the biggest source of scams in America, especially in small towns where I live too, Maine. So, you can invoke state constitutional limitations. So, require debtor matching fund beyond legislative control. Create binding obligations with federal or NGO partners. So, you know, you're going to have NGOs, but you can hold them accountable. But we're not holding any of them accountable. So, political and strategic tool, you can have public resolutions, you can pass resolutions declaring certain federal programs, climate initiatives, DO energy, unconstitutional. That hasn't happened. Interstate compacts, states can get together and fight together. That hasn't happened. Public resolutions, state attorney generals can issue opinions that are filed lawsuits rejecting coercive federal funding programs. We have a Republican governor in the state of New Hampshire. We have a majority of Republicans, and none of this is changing. But the Republicans are voting and want to push for a convention of states. But they have within their means to eliminate every federal program within their borders, but somehow Congress is the problem. Very interesting, isn't it? So, anyway, so New Hampshire is uniquely positioned, more so probably than any other state because its laws are very clear. But the path forward lies not in altering the Constitution, but in obeying it. The 10th Amendment is the final line of defense between liberty and Leviathan. To preserve self-government, state legislators must refuse the lure of federal dependency and reassert their sovereignty as the Constitution intended. Okay? The founders foresaw this moment. This is an expression that the Convention of States people say, and I'm going to steal it from them. They did foresee this moment. They knew that government would get tyrannical, but the answers are not what they say. They designed a system where the states would serve as sentinels against the rise of consolidated power, of consolidated empire, and today progressives seek to complete that consolidation through both the administrative state and well-intentioned reforms like the convention state. I'm not saying all these guys are lying. I'm not saying all these guys are bad people. I'm saying they're not being given all the right information. But these are, the convention of states and term limits are not acts of restoration. They're acts of surrender, quite simply, to the permanent administrative state. Once you have term limits in America, the game is over. The show is over for everybody. And this is what I'm here to tell you. You cannot let this happen. So, yeah, and that's it. That's everything. So, I'll take questions, but I want to sit down, so while I do that, so, anyway. This is my inaugural presentation, so usually I have to work out all the kinks and stuff like that. So thank you for coming, everybody.
Yeah, I was over there, I was like, where am I?
Yeah, I went down
You see
back
there?
there.
It was driving, we were sent in that way too, and we're like, oh, this isn't